In my last video, we were working on this project, and today I want to keep rolling with the next part of the series. If you'd like to see more videos like this, go ahead and click the link below for my Patreon. With our 20 coils in place, we can begin forming this element to sit on our pendant. I'm going to have it so that it sits just in between our two pieces of 14 gauge, and our last stone in our setting sits just above the edge of our frame. Before attaching this element, we're going to go ahead and bring the bottom side of our leftmost square out to the side. This will pass underneath our bail element, while our remaining wires will pass over the front of the bail element. On the opposite side, we're going to bring that wire out to the side as well, so we can secure it directly to the frame from there. Starting with our shorter end, we're going to pass it underneath our bail, so we can begin lining up our setting. I'm going to give just a little bit of curve to ensure that this sits nice and neat on our pendant. To secure this, we're going to start with our shorter end, passing it around the back and securing it to the back of our bail piece. With the top side loosely secured to our piece, we're going to go ahead and secure the bottom side by taking our single wire here and passing it around the frame. I've added an extra coil around our frame here to ensure that this element is fully secured into place before moving forward with it. Now that we have both sides of this secured, I'm going to go ahead and trim the top ending short, pinching that wire in towards the center of our piece. With our two 18 gauge, we're going to spiral them over the top of our bail and through the section of our coiled wire here. I'm going to start with the one closest to it, passing it through in a spiral to begin creating the filigree for our bail. Once I have it passed through and straight out to the side, we're going to follow with the second 18 gauge. To secure both of these wires, we're going to trim them short and flatten them to our coiled 16 gauge here. With our remaining 16 gauge at the top, we're going to bring it in a spiral, doing our best to keep the rounded side of our half round facing towards the top of the piece. Once this 16 gauge sits snug up against our 18 gauge, we can pass it through the bail as well to secure it into place. I've trimmed this ending short and will flatten it on top of our 18 gauge half rounds. With all of the wires at our bail section secured into place, we can go ahead and move forward with creating our first double coil. For this coil, I've cut 6 inches of 22 gauge half round and 4 feet of 30 gauge round. We're going to start about half an inch from one end and coil the entire length of our 30 gauge around our 22 gauge half round. I went ahead and coiled the entire length of my 30 gauge around my 22 gauge half round. With all 4 feet of our 30 gauge coiled, we're going to take this element and secure it to the 16 gauge that we've wrapped around the frame. As I wrap this element, I want to make sure that the flat side of our half round inside this coil is always facing towards the 16 gauge. Once I have my coil started, I can slide all the way down as far in towards the center of the frame as I can get it. From here, I'm going to go ahead and continue coiling around our 16 gauge post wire. With the entirety of our 22 gauge coil wrapped around this 16 gauge, we're going to go back and weave with our 28 gauge here in between each of the cracks of our double coil. For this pattern, we'll cross over to our double coil, feeding it through the first section of our coil, and then back to our 16 gauge. We're going to coil 2 times around our 16 gauge, and then come around and through our coil again. I'm going to repeat our pattern a total of 5 times, securing our 16 gauge to our double coil. Once we have our 5 coils through, and on the 6th rotation, we're going to cross over and coil the rest of our 28 gauge through the cracks on our coil here. Before coiling the rest of our 28 gauge down our double coil, we're going to go ahead and do 1 figure-8 tie directly to our frame, ensuring that this element sits snugly next to and on top of our frame. I've passed it all the way through the frame once, coiling just around our frame before crossing back through to coil the rest of our 28 around just our double coil. Once I've completed coiling all the way down with our 28 gauge, I'm going to trim that wire short and flatten the ending to our 16 gauge post wire. Next, we're going to take our double coil and form it around the bottom edge of our half round here and spiral it around the base of this spiral here. I'm going to take the ending and pass it between our 14 gauge on the top and our frame. Once I have it tightened, I'm going to pass the ending through to the back of the frame to tighten it into place. Our two 18 gauge wires we're going to pass around the outside edge and through the frame just past our 28 gauge figure 8 tie. To secure these wires, we're going to pass them through the frame once more. With our two 18 gauge wires now secured and coming straight down towards the bottom of our piece, we're going to take our 16 gauge from here and trace around the outside edge of our double coil. I'm going to pass its ending between the frame and the double coil and gently snug it into place so that it sits in a nice spiral around the end of that coil. From here we can set this aside to build our next double coil. For our next coil, I've cut 6 more inches of 22 gauge half round and 2 feet of 30 gauge round. We're going to start the same way we did as our previous coil, giving ourselves about half an inch of 22 gauge from one end and coiling the entire length of our 30 gauge around this half round wire. With all of our 30 gauge coiled to our 22 gauge half round, we're going to secure this element to this 18 gauge. Once I have my double coil started, I can slide this whole coil as far down towards the center of the piece as I can. As we're coiling this half round coil, we want to make sure that the flat side of our 22 gauge is always facing in towards the center of the coil. To complete this coil, I'm going to use my leftover 28 gauge round from our previous element and feed it all the way through each of the cracks of our double coil. Once I've reached the end of the section with my 30 gauge coiled around it, I can cut that ending short and make sure that both endings are tucked in towards the center of our piece. That'll conclude this section of our video. Stay tuned for the next part coming soon. A special thank you goes out to all the names on your screen for supporting this channel through Patreon. What I'm doing would not be possible without your support. If you're interested in helping support the channel, follow the link in the description below this video. If you found this video helpful, leave me a like on the video. It helps me a lot with the visibility of my videos in YouTube's algorithms. To be the first to know when I upload new content, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and hit the bell to be notified when new videos are available. Thank you for watching, and happy wrapping.